Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, bonjour to everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about open access journals best practices today. So this series of webinars is hosted by Agile in collaboration with ASAF, DOAJ, IFL, Libsens, and UCT for African journal editors and publishers. Let me just find my mouse. I have a new computer, so please excuse me. I just need to find my button. There it goes. So as indicated, this is the fourth webinar in this series. Previously, we had a look at what the directory of open access journals is about, and an overview was provided. The second webinar looked at editorial processes and business models. And the third one looked into copyright and licensing. And I've also provided the links where you can access those video recordings should you have missed out on it. But today we're looking at the best practices. And I just want to recap and start with what is an open access journal exactly? How does it differ from a subscription journal? So actually the main difference is that an open access journal is open for readers. They do not have to pay a subscription fee. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. They are also all articles submitted to an open access journal, a good quality open access journal, are also subjected to peer review and all the stringent principles and practices that apply. So a scholarly journal follows an open access publishing model. The research information is made available to readers at no cost, in other words, free, as opposed to the traditional subscription model. A paid-for printed version is allowed when we look at the requirements or the criteria, the DOAJ criteria. So, and what we've seen is that the APCs, or the article processing charges, are have to be paid in case of open access articles, have to be paid by the author themselves, or sometimes the funder pays for it, or the society to which a member belongs. So there's different approaches to paying the APCs. The DOAJ defines an open access journal as a journal where the copyright holder of a scholarly work grants usage rights to others using an open license, and the Creative Commons is a common license that's applied by many open access journals, allowing for immediate free access to the work and permitting any user to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of articles, crawl them for indexing, pass them as data to software, or use them for any other lawful purpose. And of course, citation applies. If you use an open access journal, an article from such a journal, always cite it just like you would do with a subscription journal. It's just a free version. Open access journals furthermore demonstrates high levels of transparency. They report in a transparent way, the finances are transparent, literally the policies are transparent, everything is transparent. All articles, like I've said, all articles submitted for possible publication are subjected to peer review. So now that we know what open access journals are, what is an open access journals, let's look at the principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing as compiled by the Committee on Publication Ethics, the DOAJ, ASPA, and the World Association of Medical Editors. First of all, in today's time, if you do not have a website, you do not exist, and the same applies to journals. A journal can only be open access if it has a website. A printed journal cannot be open access at all. So to be open access, you have to have a website for your journal. That website needs to adhere to the criteria for a professional website. It should be easy to navigate, user-friendly, simple. Remember, less is more. And also the information on it should be up to date. Outdated information on a website creates a bad impression. The URL, the web address, should preferably be secure, starting with an HTTPS protocol. All the information around this website should be centralized on this website. It doesn't help some of the info is on the society, which publishes the journal's website, and the rest is on the journal's website. Everything that has to do with the journal should be centrally published on the journal website. Language use should be consistent. So if your website is both in English and French, then all pages in this website should be in both languages. Good use of spelling and grammar. Often when we review journals, and when I see a typo or a mistake in the grammar, it immediately raises red flags for me. It's not to say it's a bad journal, it's just that you want to adhere to a high quality website, and putting the information out there, you want to create a good impression. Hyperlinks should all resolve. There's nothing as frustrating as when you go to a website and you click on author guidelines or on submit, and then you get this 404 error. Secondly, demonstrate that care has been taken to ensure high quality, ethical and professional standards throughout the website. A website must also not contain information that might mislead readers or authors, or attempts to mimic another journal's publisher or a publisher's website. Something that we that can in this an example of this is when a publisher just copy and paste and all the journals look the same. I also have this question: how can this be? Because each journal is supposed to have its unique identity and look different from one another. So yes, it's very difficult to distinguish one journal from another if they all look the same and they only have different titles and different ISSNs. The website should include the focus or the aims and the scope. What is this journal trying to do? What's the science about published in this specific scholarly journal? And how far does it reach? Is it limited to Africa, or to does it apply to the whole world, or does it apply to a specific region only? Also clearly indicate what is the readership, who are the people who would possibly be interested in reading articles in this journal, and also who would publish articles in this journal. This website should also have a coverage or statement of what the journal will consider for publication and what not. Authorship criteria should be included, and also how the journal deals with multiple submissions, whether the journal allows multiple submissions by the same author, and redundant publications. There's a number of options when it comes to journal management software. So you can choose to host your journal on a website using website software like WordPress, or you can opt for custom-made software specifically for the management of a journal, a scholarly journal, to accommodate all the editorial workflows involved from the submission of the article to the review to the copy editing and the final stage of publishing. So a system with which I'm very much familiar, and I believe it's also quite popular, is the Public Knowledge Project PKP Open Journal Systems software. You can download it for free from its open source software. It means the code is open. You can download the software on a server and host one journal, or you can opt for a federated approach where you can host all publications or all journals published by your organization, if there's more than one. There's also a demo site and also a test bed where you can try it out. But on the right-hand side, you can see many more to choose from. And it's great to have a variety to choose from. So, and yes, Open Journal Systems also listed there. This is just an example page of a landing page of one of our journals, so that you can get a feel of what are the elements included in the website for a journal. So typically we would have a banner. There's an option where you can log in or register. The navigation, very simple homepage about, which will include the technical information about the journal, focus and scope, etc. Button where you can submit either there or there. Guidelines and policies, archives to access former issues, and then contact information. And yeah, and also an option to search across this journal. And the homepage being the most recent or current issue published, just as an example. The nice thing about PKP OJS is that it's well integrated. There's good integration between PKP OJS and the Directory of Open Access Journals. Once you've set up your journal and started publishing articles, it's very simple to export. Sorry, if I lighted the wrong plugin, here at the bottom you would see the DOAJ export plugin. It's easy to export the metadata, in other words, the descriptive descriptions about the article, the title, the author, the DOI, etc., to the Directory of Open Access Journals, so that that would provide another access point for your journal from where people can access your journal in the end. Another important best practice is to have a proper name for your journal. It should be unique, distinct, descriptive, and consistent. If you register it on the ISSN, the name as you use it on your website should be consistent with how it was registered on the ISSN registry, for example. The name should be clearly distinguished and not to be easily confused with another journal. And you must not mislead potential users, authors, or readers about the journal's origin or association with other journals. An example of a very vague journal title for me is example, the International Journal of Education. It's not very focused and it doesn't say what about education, while a better example to change that title would be South African Journal of Child Education, something more specific. So take great care when you decide on a name for your journal, something that you can use forever and ever. Then, as I've said, open access journals, articles are all subjected to peer review. And I'm going to share some examples with you now. The journal content must be clearly marked as to whether it was peer reviewed or not. If you peer review letters, which you publish from readers, which you publish in your journal, they might not be proofread or edited or peer reviewed. But a research article, it's a requirement that your research articles have to be peer reviewed by experts in the field. And this peer review process and policy must be clearly described on your journal website, including the method of peer review. So take time and write it out, and so that your website provides an extensive explanation and a transparent explanation of how you conduct the peer review for the journal. Yes, I've already said journals must apply a rigorous review process similar to subscription journals. And the peer review should be done by at least 2 independent reviewers who are experts in the field. When it comes to DOAJ, and application to be included for DOAJ, an editorial review is only allowed if journals are from the arts and humanities. And another DOAJ requirement is that faculty oversight is required for student journals published by students. So this is an example of a peer review process. So you can see it's quite an extensive description of what is being peer reviewed and what processes are being followed, and when are the articles subjected to plagiarism checks? What's the role of the associate editors? and how long reviewers get to do the reviews, etc. So it will be different for each and every journal. And you can sit with your editorial advisory board to decide how you want to approach this peer review process. DOJ recommends plagiarism checking, but it's not required for inclusion. And should you have a plagiarism checking tool to check your articles that are submitted, we require that you state the name of a checking service or protocol used. And this is an example of a plagiarism policy from the South African Journal of Science. And I want to mention, because of using PKP OJS and because of us having a subscription with Crossref, we qualify for using Authenticate as part of a Crossref subscription, which is not much. And there's also a plugin for part of PKP OJS, which integrates with Authenticate. So if you activate this tool, it will check each and every paper for plagiarism before it goes through the editorial workflow. Ownership and management should be clear on the website. Also, who is the publisher, who is the organization or the owner of this journal? If it's a scholarly society, acknowledge that scholarly society. If it's the university, acknowledge that university. And the publisher should also not use organizational or journal names that would mislead potential authors and editors about the nature of the journal's owner. And this is an example of a journal that clearly indicates, the title is clear, and it indicates the society with which it is affiliated, the Journal of the National Association of Clear Air, with a logo of that association. So an example, or you can have it here on the right-hand side or anywhere, it depends on what software you use. The editorial board and governing bodies members should be clearly listed on your website, and the full names and affiliations of the editorial board or the governing board should be available on the website, as in this example. And what we do, we also integrate org IDs. So should somebody want to publish in this journal and they want to see who this editor-in-chief is, they can click on his org ID and it will take them to a list of his publications, his brief biography, and so forth. And this specific journal has different sections editors for different themes. With the emails available as when you click on the little envelope, and of course the org IDs. And we also require the full names and affiliations of other contact persons, part of the editorial office, and their full address, as in this example. So website, advertising inquiries, postal address, etc. So copyright and licensing was discussed during last week's webinar. But the copyright policy should preferably also form part of the author guidelines, so that all potential authors do not miss that important part of information. And the copyright holder should be specified on all published articles. And later in the presentation, I will show you how it can be done. And the licensing terms, how users can use and share the articles published in your journal should also be indicated. So you can have a copyright policy, you should have a copyright policy and a licensing policy. And whether the articles are made available as PDF, HTML or XML, both the copyright and licensing should be indicated on those papers. And there's some examples of what a copyright and license terms looks like. It doesn't have to be a long essay. You can just indicate copyright remains with the authors of the articles, and all articles published by this journal can be reused and with the following license, and then have a link there so that people can see what is this license about, what are the specifics. And OJS, what it does is also very nice. It embeds a machine readable license as part of the article record. It's also good to have a self-archiving policy. In other words, should an author want to archive a copy of an article published in this journal on his or her own website or in an institutional repository, what is your policy about that? Will you as the journal allow that? And according to the best practice, list of best practice, there should also be a link to author agreement. It should be visible so that authors can see what agreement do they enter into when they publish in this article and can read it beforehand. This is an example of a self-archiving policy where it says authors may not deposit any version of a manuscript into a subject or institution repository until the manuscript has been published. Authors may then deposit the final published version in a subject or institution repository, etc. And this is an example of an author declaration and agreement. And this from the Potchefstroom Electronic Law Journal, where it specifies what rights do you have, what's the requirements when submitting an article. Also be very transparent about your author fees, even if you do not charge author fees for authors. Indicate as such, as I've mentioned here. Also indicate if no fees are charged or whether waivers apply or not apply. So be straightforward and think of the possible questions your potential authors might have. And the information should be easy to find prior to submission. Authors should not be surprised to have been charged with this enormous amount after the paper has been approved for publication. It should be openly accessible on your website, and there's some examples, once again, just 1 or 2 sentences, but be clear about what you will charge for. With regard to misconduct, of course, this should never be allowed. Plagiarism, citation manipulation, data falsification, fabrication, etc. And although editors and reviewers do their best to prevent that from happening, there can be occurrences where it might slip through, but you don't want that to happen. So try your best where the publisher or editor is made aware of any allegation of research conduct related to an article after it has been published. There are some COPE guidelines in dealing with the allegations. So we strongly recommend that you visit or Google COPE guidelines for misconduct and make it your own. There should also be clear policies on the publication ethics, have policies on authorship and contributorship. Of course, I've mentioned authorship already. How will the journal handle complaints and appeals? What's the journal's policies on conflicts of interest? What's the journal's policies on data sharing and reproducibility? What's the journal's policy on ethical oversight and intellectual property? And the journal's options for post-publication discussions and corrections. So I've extracted a few examples from journals that we publish, just so that you can get an idea. Different journals calls it different names, but you should have a misconduct policy which address many of these things like conflicts of interest, retraction, if it's a malpractice, etc. The website should also give a clear indication of how frequently it publishes an issue or individual articles. And journals with interrupted publishing will not be considered for inclusion in DOAJ. So at least you have to publish at least 5 research articles per year in your journal. It excludes all other forms of materials such as book reviews or letters from readers, etc. If your journal flipped from subscription access to open access, then you need to publish at least 10 open access articles before applying according to the DOAJ criteria. And here's an example of how journals display their publication frequency. So it can be a simple sentence, 6 times a year, 1 volume per annum, and each volume consists of 4 issues. And this journal, for example, operates under a continuous publication model. So they publish articles one by one and then assign a digital object identifier to each article. So eventually they only have 1 volume per annum. Very important, since this is an open access journal, you have to indicate the open access policy for this journal. And one that we recommend is the following. This journal is a peer-reviewed open access journal supporting the Budapest Open Access Initiative principles, which says what open access means. So important that you have this policy because it distinguishes you from a subscription journal. Archiving, also very important in the case of a disaster. I cannot help to think of the war going on, but should should something happen to the server hosting your journal, you have to have a digital backup in place and a preservation plan for your journal. At the Academy of Science of South Africa, we have an agreement with Portico. So you can also Google Portico, but there's other options, the locks option, where universities come together or organizations come together and they back up one another's or keep copies of one another's journals and articles. LOG stands for lots of copies, keep stuff safe. I think CLOC stands for the consortium of lots of copies keep stuff safe. I'm not sure about that one. And then of course PubMed Central can also be used to preserve your journal for the unforeseeable future. Should your journal comes to an end and you decide to no longer continue with publishing, it must be clearly indicated. And please also notify the Director of Open Access Journals. Once again, I just want to demonstrate the alignment with OJSP and the integration between third parties tools and OJSP-KP. So once you've published an issue, you can simply click on PubMed Export plugin, and it will send that issue with its articles to PubMed without you having to do anything else, except for ticking a few boxes. And then the Portico Export plugin, the same. You just indicate which articles you want to export, and there you go. Of course, it has to be set up and you have to have agreements in place with the third parties. Then there's also the PKP Preservation Network, which you can make use of should you use PKP OJS. They provide free preservation services for any OJS journal that meets a few basic criteria. And then again, locks and clocks also, the locks and clocks process also automated and well integrated with the PKP OJS software. So you can just tick those boxes should you be part of a locks or clocks initiative. This is an example of a digital preservation policy for one of our journals. It says the South African Journal of Agricultural Extension utilizes both the Portico and the PKP preservation network systems to create permanent archives of a journal for purposes of preservation and restoration. And click here to see the journal on this Portico registry. When people visit your journal, whether it's as a reader or an author, they want to see that this journal is managed in a responsible way. And all these things I've been mentioning are, demonstrate that journals adhere to best practices. So revenue sources indicate how do you generate income What's your author's fees? Do you generate income from subscriptions, advertising, reprints, do you get institutional support or organizational support? Mention it, acknowledge your funder as part of the about section for your journal. Just a very important also, journals should not allow that the publishing fees or the waiver status influence editorial decision making. Advertising, also have an advertising policy, or tell your users, do you allow advertising or don't you allow advertising? If you allow advertising, indicate what types of adverts do you allow, who takes the decision on who allows certain adverts, and what content must the adverts have when allowed. And also keep the advertisements separate from published content or the editorial decision making. And you will see how it was done in this example. The advertising policy for Clean Air Journal states that it publishes advertisements and announcements relevant to air quality and its impact in Africa. These include advertisements of companies and organizations working in this field, announcements of conferences and workshops, and relevant job listings. NACA, the publisher of this journal, approves the advertisements. So it's not the editor. It's separated from the editor's role. NACA approves the advertisements that are published, and this process is separate from the editorial process of the journal. And here you can see an example on the right-hand side. They have a couple of advertisements neatly stacked on top of one another, and it's hyperlinked. So, and this is one way of generating an income for a journal. Direct marketing refers to the solicitation of manuscripts. I'm sure all of you have experience of those emails ending up in your inbox telling you and inviting you to publish in a specific journal, but it can become very obtrusive. So be careful when you do direct marketing. Rather invite a potential author directly, addressing him or her by his or her name and title. And this kind of marketing should be appropriate, well-targeted, and unobtrusive. And once again, the information shared about the journal should be truthful and not misleading. I think you've heard this a couple of times throughout this presentation. Open access journals should be transparent. A high quality open access journal, trusted open access journal, also has an ISSN number. So if your journal doesn't have an ISSN number, you can go request an ISSN at this web address, and also display your ISSN. In this example, initially this journal was published in print only, but then it went open access. And although the title remained the same, they had to apply for an online ISSN. So please note that the two ISSNs are different because it's in different formats. And if you're not sure what the journal's ISSN is, or whether you're in doubt whether you can trust the journal, and whether it really exists and whether the ISSN is valid, you can also search for an ISSN on this portal. Org ID integration is also recommended. So there's many checks in place to make sure that an open access journal can be trusted. Before being included in the ISSN will do some kind of evaluation and checks. With Org ID, this is more about the authors, a unique identifier or unique ID for each and every author, so that there's no confusion when authors share the same names. And once again, you can see how we've integrated it here. There's the Org ID. The Open Researcher and Contributor ID is the full name for Org ID. It's added to the metadata for the article. Even before it's also added to the PDF, the full text, but in our case, we also added to the metadata. And this metadata is then exported to Crossref, and OrgID then harvests the metadata from Crossref and then automatically add this title to the profile for each of these researchers. So, preferably also have the names, the research name for this person, is his or her affiliation country. And yes, this is also hyperlinked, so a reader can anytime just click and go and see what this author publishes and does. So if you want to search for somebody's org ID, you can do it so there, or if you do not have, and if your authors do not have an org ID yet, they can register for free at orgid.org register. Another important persistent identifier is the the digital object identifier, or DOI in short. So where the ISSN is the unique ID for a specific journal, and for OrgID is a unique ID for a person. The DOI, digital object identifier, is the unique ID for a specific article. So as I've indicated, we have an agreement with Crossref. We register when a DOI is assigned by an article, also automatically assigned by PKPIJS and included in the metadata, but also on the full text PDF. We export the metadata to Crossref, and then this becomes the valid identifier for this article, and it will never change. Even if we decide to move this journal, the South African Journal of Science, from one server to another server, the DOI will never change, because we will manage it in the back end. We will notify Crossref accordingly that the web address now has changed for a specific article. So Crossref, read more about Crossref at this address, and you can become a member also should you want to start assigning DOIs. The Initiative for Open Citations, or I4OC, promotes the unrestricted availability of scholarly citation data. And why do they do this? Because citations are primary data that provide both provenance and an explanation for how we know facts. Citations used for articles are the most important vehicle for the discovery, dissemination, and evaluation of all scholarly knowledge. So what this initiative encourages is a linked web. So when an article is published and the references or the citations are listed, and when they are validated by Crossref and hyperlinked, it makes it easier for users to also access the references used as part of references used to compile or write an article. And I've just gone into the Academy of Science of South Africa profile. We support this initiative, and it gives a summary of how many references have been registered, org IDs, etc. So we are doing our best to improve on this and support this global initiative. Now I'm just going to quickly drill down to the article before I'm going to wrap up. Apart from the journal itself and what the website and the content it contains, it's also important that your article contains certain information. So in the example which I got from the South African Journal of Science, it has a crossmark button where readers can check for updates of this article, should there be any updates. For example, if this article was retracted or replaced with another article. The authors are listed here on the left-hand side with links to their org IDs, the affiliations once again, and then the corresponding author and the contact email should the readers want to get in touch. And also important to demonstrate how long it took for the review to take place, how long did it take from submission to being published? So I would say from 22 June to 27 January were approximately 6 months. So this is a good time for this to happen. So and how to cite, so I have a recommendation how I want you to cite this article. Remember earlier on I said you should indicate whether your articles were peer-reviewed or not. You can indicate it as part of the article metadata and indicate it on the PDF full text article itself. Also have an option, these are just recommendations, so it's not requirements. You can also indicate whether data underlying this article have been made available and whether it is available. Who's the editor, the section editor, who was responsible for this article, keywords, who was the funder, SDGs with which this specific article aligns, who the copyright belongs to and which license applies, and then also the DOI accompanying this article for its lifetime. Why is this important? Because people email full text articles between one another, and then you wouldn't know what the bibliographical details of this article or the details of this article is when you do not have all this info available. So this is an extreme example, I think, a very complete and comprehensive article with a technical detail to the left. So I want to end on this note, and please get in touch should you need should you have any questions or need any assistance from our side. We are well versed in HASPKP and also in open access, but first of all, we are DOAJ ambassadors. I work in Southern Africa, but Kamal Balhamel also on this call works in North Africa, Thomas in West and Central Africa, and Solomon in Eastern Africa. So thank you, and over to you. Tom, are you gonna coordinate the questions?
So there has been not many questions.
Okay, that's
and
good.
I think we don't have much time because, well, it's well over the 45 minutes already. But anyway, the first question that came in, it's a good question for you to answer. Is it better to have the journal website different from the website of the society that owns a journal, even when the journal has a direct online link to the website? It's a question from the audience, from Mikael Madukwe.
Yes, I think if you want to benefit, if you want your journal to benefit from the workflow, the editorial workflow within the journal management system, it would be good not to confuse the two. So my recommendation, and from experience, what I've seen is that usually the society or the organization has its website, its membership information, other information, because the society is about more than just the journal. So usually the society website would have a link to the publication or to the journal title, which will take you to another website. And it depends on the design. You can have the same design, but just use a proper journal management system for your journal. So I would try to make the look and feel and the branding similar as close as possible. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I think just a correction on, or perhaps a possible misinterpretation of what you have talked about the embedded licenses, so that all articles need to have the copyright and license with the article. It's not a requirement for DOAJ, but of course it's best practice, because if an article is just there and there is nothing on the information on license, nobody knows what to do with it. But we don't have the policy that you need to do that. So if you tell in your website you use this license and this is the copyright policy, then the articles can be published without that notice, that the people know that the website says it. Of course, it's less than optimal, but it's not the requirement. And perhaps people thought from your talk that it is a requirement.
Sorry, and thank you for clarifying. Now,
That is very important, I think. Yeah, and perhaps also for the archiving policy, we receive lots of applications where people think that an archiving is just have your stuff in the university library site, or even with some vague indexing services. So it really has to be a long-term preservation. And one of the things that is possible for the DOHA is if you use the Internet Archive, which is something that everybody can just do, even if you don't use the PKP method. So perhaps that is interesting additional information.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we don't have really time at this stage for the other questions, but we can make these questions also at the end of the French presentation, I would say. So I would go over to Kamel as the moderator for the French part.